Hey now, welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track, America's leading Formula One podcast. I'm Brian Saperstein. That's Rob Vale. Rob, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing very, very well, Brian. Thank you. I am happy to start picking up the social piece because my inner child has just been so happy this week.
I know where this is going.
I know. I was trawling through kind of looking at websites, Twitter, just general feed, thinking, we need something to go on the intro at the show when we talk about what's been going on this week. And then Aston Martin served up and gift wrapped and put a bow around what I was going to open with because I'm a child, and they have now appointed somebody that Bart Simpson would absolutely love. So now, to add to the list of BO Problem and Amanda Hug and Kiss, we now have Mike Crack, which is I just love it. One of the best things I saw on Twitter was everyone was kind of playing on the different things that you can play on his name about Mike Crack. And they said that if he was interviewed about the chances asked for an opinion, it would be, well, Mike Crack is itching for a podium finish.
It just feels like the name of someone they'd page at Target. Attention all Target shoppers, we're looking for Mike Crack. Mike Crack, please report to the service desk. I mean, there's no way. So obviously Otmar Shafnauer, I almost got that, had left Aston Martin as team principal. And I would actually ask you, Rob, can you spell Otmar's last name for me?
No.
Do you want to take a try? Starts with an S.
I'm not even getting into this. I can barely pronounce it. I was just going to call him Otmar, which I imagine everybody does.
Yeah, Szafnauer. He has an amazing car collection. He seemed like a really good dude. I wish him well, whatever he's doing next. But yes, Mike Crack, now at Aston Martin. I mean, Purple Sectors on Twitter wrote, if Ferrari fans are the Tifosi and McLarens are the Team Papaya, does this make Aston Martin fans crackheads?
It's just got so much mileage. It really has.
It actually was fascinating. All other Aston Martin news this week. So like 2 days after Otmar left, before Mike Crack was announced as the executive director, Lance Stroll put it on Twitter that he hit his first ever hole-in-one, which is really cool. So really excited. Lance Stroll gets his first hole-in-one. And I actually wanted to talk about Lance Stroll. We haven't done a bit here yet, a segment yet on driver numbers. Formula One does a pretty good one itself, where they ask the drivers why they chose the numbers they have. So totally recommend you check it out. But Lance basically just said, 18 seemed like a good number to pick. I, however, think that there might be something behind it that he's not telling us. I think there might be an opportunity for a different kind of version. Sap stats. It's like the F1 intro, but with a mariachi band doing it, and they were going to use it for Mexico, but I don't think they ever did. And it might be my favorite song ever. I was jamming it in the car the other day. It is that good. But so back to Lance Stroll and number 18. So if you go to Lawrence Stroll, his father, and one of the owners of Aston Martin proper, not just the race team, a billionaire, and you look at his Wikipedia, it says Lawrence Stroll was born to a Jewish family in Montreal. And at the time, when I first saw this, it didn't say anything about religion on Lance's wiki. And while the Dirty Side of the Track has nothing to do with religion whatsoever, because we're just here to have fun and deal with race cars, I would note that the number 18, and here's where the SAP stats come in, is a very powerful symbolic and numeric figure in Judaism. It is the number chai, and so that means life. And as a boy who was bar mitzvahed and everything, I can tell you that 18 is a big deal. And so for someone to choose 18, who is of, apparently, according to Wikipedia, some version of Jewish descent, I have to think he's calling upon all of the positive aspects of chai, which means, as I said, life. And it is a big deal. Like if you go to a mitzvah, you give them a multiple of 18. It's just 18 is a big, big deal. So for me, when I saw Lance as number 18, and I put these pieces together, I think we talked about, we don't do conspiracy theories here. Well, we just did one as a SAP stat, but that's okay.
That wasn't really a SAP stat. That was more Brian becomes Columbo.
Or an internet troll, sleuth, weirdo. But anyway, so That was my Aston Martin piece. Executive director is moving around. Marcin Budkowski from Alpine looks like he left, and I always loved when they'd have him on the telecasts. He was great. I thought his perspective, and no announcement on if there will be a replacement. Alpine is kind of a weird structure. I don't know if they will replace him or if other people will step in and are out. I don't really know, but yeah, exciting news in the paddock as people come and go, and just gonna wait and see about all the crackheads at Aston Martin.
Yeah, and the other piece that kind of caught my eye, which was great timing after I'd gone out there on a limb and bigged up Ferrari on the last episode. Obviously, we recorded it on the Sunday. I think it was either Monday or Tuesday. They had an interview with Carlos Sainz, and he was bigging up his championship prospects. And it was really nice to see, he's never going to come out and say, oh yeah, I'm just going to lose to Lewis and Max and I'm just going to hope for third. I mean, he's never going to say that. Of course, he's got to come out and big up his chances, but he could have just come out and said, last year was a great season. I'm looking for a better season this year. I'm going to build on that. I'm going to develop it. And he hasn't. He's gone basically straight in there and said, great season last year, my best ever season. And, we should be in there fighting for the championship, and maybe me personally as well. So it's nice to kind of see that fighting talk coming out.
For sure. He is, we've both professed our appreciation for Carlos and what he can do and what he did last year. So I'm also excited about that. I know we both saw something else. Do you want to highlight that note we shared with each other around the same time?
Yeah, we both obviously subscribed to the F1 email list, and we both saw the launch dates for cars. Aston already, I think they're first out of the gate, and they've said February the 10th or as close to it as possible. And that should be the thing that opens the floodgates, and we see all the other cars starting to come through. The Formula One website is trying to, or the social feed as well, is trying to kind of whip up some excitement around this, because they keep dropping, that sort of vanilla 2022 car that they came up with just to show what the new shape was going to look like.
As we talked about last week, I think it looks like handlebar mustache, but that's okay. But yeah, anyway.
They've been rendering different teams' liveries on them to kind of say, hey, this is what the Red Bull one might look like. This is what Mercedes might look like. So they're trying to whip up some excitement, but it'd just be nice now to get the real cars out there. So we've not got too much longer to wait before Aston do theirs. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, I am definitely as well about watching these cars come out. One or two last things from the social review. Obviously, with no races in the off season, it's good to keep up with Formula One through the lens of social, as we've been doing and will always continue to do. But the big news that I saw that really had people on Twitter, at least in a frenzy, is that F1 confirms a review of the Abu Dhabi race. And now, for just to close out, that was the last race of the year. That was where the race director sort of had this hybrid approach to letting a handful of lapped cars through and then quickly bring the safety car in and make it a one-lap sprint to the finish, which disadvantaged, obviously, Lewis and gave Max an advantage, of which he was able to pull off and win the championship. And not to relitigate any of that, Mercedes did have two protests about that race, and both were dismissed, and they chose not to appeal. However, the FIA later announced that there'd be a detailed analysis and clarification exercise, and I'm reading this verbatim, for the future with all relevant parties. The outcome of the detailed analysis will be presented at the F1 Commission in February, and the final decisions, here's where it gets juicy, will be announced at the World Motorsport Council in Bahrain on 18 March. Okay, now this one didn't require me Columboing anything. That's the first race. They're going to present to the public whatever it is they're doing at the first race. The 18th is Friday. That's free practice day at Bahrain at the first race of the year. Why would they do that? Why? What would make them say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do our own analysis into the debacle that ended last season, and we're going to announce the findings at the first race of the brand new season. What makes that a good idea? I don't understand.
I don't either. And it's kind of, you're already being ridiculed as an organization that doesn't seem to be able to get their act together. And you need to look at this. And people are kind of, there's a lot of different, once you get past all the trolling and all the kind of angry people on social media, there's some decent kind of thought process out there of, this needs a proper revision of the safety car rules. And what it probably also needs a revision of is, some people jump into the defense of Michael Massey, saying that there is a rule in the rule book that basically says, the race director's discretion, which is kind of crazy, because what's that basically saying is, here's an entire rule book, but screw it, he can do what he wants. Now, if that was in there to try to give some kind of ability to operate discretion amongst the rules, then I'm okay with that. Someone drew parallel to the world of footy where, if there's a foul on the field, then the referee can let play go on if he feels it's an advantage to the team that currently has the ball. The rules would say it's a free kick. You've got to stop play. But the spirit of the rules is to try and to allow the referee to kind of facilitate the game still going. And I think that's what the spirit of that race director rule is. Okay, there's these structured rules that a race must be driven to these particular rules, but we want the race director to be able to have a little bit of discretion. And if that's what the spirit of that rule was, then rewrite it so that the jurisdiction of that spirit is a lot more locked down. Because if they were able to say after the scrutiny that he did nothing wrong because of this little get out of jail card, that's just nuts.
Yeah.
And if the outcome is that they review it and they roll out new rules and new safety car measures, they're going to tell the teams on the Friday. By the way, when
before
you race
the first race. Yeah, exactly. I think I'm expecting, as soon as we get into qualifying, I'm expecting a little something from Crofty.
What has happened?
Yeah, we'll find out. That is just, I don't understand why they would do that. Last thing from the world of social, on Instagram, Valtteri Bottas, who we both expect a big year from next year, posted a picture of himself doing a naked handstand or cartwheel. I don't know. I didn't stop long enough to figure out exactly what it was because I didn't want to see. And there was a sun over his man bits. But why? We saw your naked butt in Drive to Survive. That was enough, Valtteri. Just keep that stuff behind whatever finished clothing you want to wear. We don't need to see it.
Maybe it's his thing now. It's everyone needs a thing, a branding thing, and maybe Valtteri's ass is going to be his go-to thing now.
Oh, please don't let it be. Please do not let it be. All right. As promised, a couple things we want to do this week that we told you we would do. We want to talk a little bit about fantasy Formula One. And in particular, one of our listeners, Jim Moyer, highlighted as well over Twitter and text a good idea to kind of check this out. So, Jim, thank you. We will do that. We'll talk about it now. Following this, we'll have, as promised, a driver profile. We'll do that. And then for next week, everyone should be very excited. Rob and I are going to get an opportunity to kind of hit, 8 to 10 or so different kind of key things to know about Formula One. And so for those who are experienced fans, you're welcome to watch and make fun of us as we screw things up. And for those of you who are newer, just know we're getting it close enough. And I winked my eye and kind of held my thumb up as I did that. So we'll see how we do. But fantasy
sorry, just one thing on people kind of like calling us out. I think that'd be great. If people that really know their stuff, you shouldn't not listen to next week's podcast because you know it. I think it's an opportunity to rip into us. And talking of ripping into us, you corrected me last week.
Me?
Yes, you corrected me last week that on Miami Vice, it was a pink shirt underneath his suit.
Well, it wasn't always the same color. I mean, but okay, well, yeah, I'm listening. I'm listening.
I said black and you shot me down. You said, pink. Come on, Rob, pink. You Google Crockett, and he was a man of pastel colors. I'll give you pink was in there. There was quite often a lime green. And guess what else was in there quite often, Brian?
Black?
Black. Yes.
Yeah. I know that.
Well, I mean, I was just seeing last week.
I was just seeing if you knew that, if you were willing to stand up for it, and you weren't. You're kind of calling me out here. It reminds me of this moment in Formula One.
I think Ericsson hit us.
Roman Grosjean, Baku, a handful of years ago. I think Ericsson hit us when he just wiped out all by himself on the warm-up lap. So thanks for calling me out. I think Ericsson hit me last week, and I was right.
Right. Sorry, you were saying fantasy.
Yeah, this is going to go great now that you're already raising the stakes here on this. All right. I found last year that Formula1.com offers fantasy. And like the second or third race of the year, I found it. And I thought this sounded brilliant. I've been doing, as a lot of people here in the States have been doing fantasy sports for a long time. Football obviously brought a lot of people around. I started with basketball in college, which was in the 90s. I'm old. And so I'm a big fan of just having some extra fun. If you enjoy the sport, you can sort of divorce yourself from your favorites and kind of still play fantasy and back whomever you think might be good that week. So in the fantasy version on Formula1.com, you get 5 drivers, 1 constructor on your team. Of course, you can't have everything you want. There's a budget. It's $100 million that you get to buy, the participation of those 5 drivers and 1 constructor each week. Now, you can change it around. It's not for the season. You can change it by race. If you're heading to Monza and you think the car has a particular team has a higher speed car, you can move that direction. If you end up in Monaco or somewhere else and you think they're going to qualify better, obviously flip it around how you want to do it. We created for the last race, because I didn't get my act together, we made a little dirty side league. Rob, I invited to the last race. He'd never done it. And so we did one race together at the end of the year, Abu Dhabi. I had 148 points. Rob had 145. He even used a thing called a mega bonus, which I will explain, that I did not have left, and I still beat him. So what we he's making a big face for those of you just who aren't able to see it. We are going to do the Dirty Side League again in 2022. And I cannot wait to get everybody in there, and to my friends here who are just figuring it out, and to all the listeners who are still figuring out F1, to those who are experts, please participate. I mean, it's a great way to kind of talk smack about how we do. And I promise each week when we recap last week, we will highlight the fantasy champion for that week and at least give them a shout out. And, you're welcome to also, if you win, tweet at us and tell us something bad about myself or Rob, which we would appreciate if you beat us, because I think it'll be pretty easy to beat us.
I'm looking forward to you taking us through the format of this, because like you said, you invited me at the last minute to the last race, and I just kind of piled in there and just kind of picked whatever I could. It asked me, it popped up, do you want to use your mega bonus? I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just pressing buttons all over the place. So you've been playing it all year, and I lost you by 3 points. I'm calling that moral victory. So
as we talked about in the first week, there are no moral victories in life, but all right. So as I said, I played most of the year. I missed the first 2 races because I didn't even know it existed. I finished 346,000 in the world, which sounds pretty bad, but there were 1.1 million teams. So top third. Even missing a couple races, they don't adjust for that. So it's just zeros. In the US, I was 31,000 out of 105,000. So about the same kind of ratio. And let's talk a little bit about how it works before we get into the scoring, because the scoring, quite honestly, is the hardest thing to understand. And you would think that would be the easiest. It isn't. So first of all, you can kind of accumulate value. And this was a really neat thing. As drivers and teams grow in value, or as they produce results and people buy them more often, their value goes up. And you can also lose value. So if you pick a team and a driver has a terrible week and everyone's selling, the value of that driver from when you purchased him goes down. And same for constructors. So I ended the year with $103.1 million. I start the year with 100, ended with 103.1. That's not great, but it's positive. And I didn't do a lot of flipping. So I would often leave my drivers in and they'd ride them up and then down as well. I just kind of had some drivers I liked. I wasn't in it to try to create the highest amount of value. However, that's a strategy, because if you do that, you can buy more expensive drivers who are higher up the chain, produce more points.
Okay, so the 100 million cap's not a firm cap. You take someone when they're cheap and their stock rises and you cash them in, then you'll be able to afford, say, I don't know, for argument's sake, Max as well as Lewis and really go to town. Cool.
And you could actually afford Max and Lewis to start with. You would just have to have Nikita, George, and Mick as your other drivers, basically. I'm exaggerating a tiny bit, but that's not far off. There are limits to substitution. So each week you can start over, but you only get 3 free substitutions. So again, 5 drivers and a constructor. You have 6 people, 6 things in your bucket. 3 free substitutions. 4, 5, and 6. The 4th, 5th, and 6th substitution will cost you 10 points each. So we said we had 148 points, 143 points. So if we'd done extra subs, you just start reducing 10 every time beyond the third. Yes, that's a lot. So it's a real penalty. You have to want to do it. However, twice a year you get extra subs. It's called a subs bank. And you can replenish those substitutions. So twice a year, you get the opportunity, I think 1 in each half of the year, you get an opportunity to say, you know what, this week I really got to throw the whole team out and start over again, which I did use both my subs banks. I came in and I had a bad fantasy formula week, and like my drivers that I really cheer for had a bad week. And I'm like, I'm done. And I just kicked them off the team before I even really thought about it. And then I was sitting there with nothing. I'm like, well, I got to start over. So the neat thing that I thought was kind of cool is each week for free, you get to choose your turbo driver. And the turbo driver is anyone who's valued under $20 million. And so effectively it's anyone except Max and Lewis. And you can choose any driver outside of Max and Lewis as your turbo driver. You get double points. The whole season, pick your turbo driver. Anyone who's not Max and Lewis, you get double points. I rode Checo as my turbo driver for almost the whole first half of the year, and then Carlos for almost the whole second half of the year. And it really helped. It really helped because, I mean, those guys had good, like when in Baku, when Lewis messed up the brake magic and went flying off and Checo came through and won. I mean, I had a ton of points because of that.
I think that's similar to kind of most fantasy sports. They'll use kind of fantasy footy would use like you pick your team captain that week and they'll get double points. So I think anyone that's played any kind of fantasy sport, a lot of what you're saying, it's kind of very, very similar, right? It should be easy to jump on board. And what I also love is even if you know nothing, I used to run like back in my first job. So late 90s, I used to run the office fantasy football. Or fantasy, I'm going to keep it as fantasy football. I'm not changing that. And it was back in the day before the internet was really there. So it was buy the newspaper on a Wednesday, manually type the points into the Excel sheet and calculate the points. And you had these people that took it ridiculously seriously, scientific. I actually wasn't one of them. I was kind of somewhere in the middle. I would kind of do some research and kind of forget to do it some weeks. But we had times where people that had no clue, didn't even follow it. They just wanted to be part of, in as part of the club and part of the experience. They just picked 11 random players and hope for the best and then win the whole thing. So I think anybody should jump on board with this. You don't have to have a PhD in Formula One. It sounds like where we're going in a minute, we're going to need the PhD to understand the scoring, but yes. I'll leave that to you, Brian.
No, I totally agree. A great example is I have a friend who's long since done college football, real football, bowl pool, not your soccer junk. And so the college football bowl pool, it's $5 and everyone enters and like their kids enter. And a couple years ago, my friend's daughter won because she picked teams who had names she thought were cool. So everybody needs to get in. Fantasy Formula, the Dirty Side League is free. FREE, free, double free. Join us, and we will make sure we give shouts out to the winner. There's a few other things like the mega bonus I mentioned once or twice a year. This might also be on each side of the break. So you get maybe 2 a year. It triples any particular driver. And as I said, Rob used it in that last week since he was new and had it, and he still lost to me. Just a shambles all around from Rob. So let's talk a little bit about value, just so you guys get a feel. $100 million, you got to pick your drivers. The highest, most expensive value at the end of the year, I'll use end of the year, was Lewis at $33 million. And the cheapest driver at the end of the year was Nikita Mazepin at $5.3 million. So huge gulf between them, again, because Nikita rarely scored points. And as I get into scoring, you'll see what the difference is. So I have a couple questions for my man, Rob, here. Who do you think was second after Lewis?
That's got to be Max.
It's got to be Max. And here's what's fascinating is Lewis actually went down on the year in terms of value. He started the year at 33.5, closed at 33 dead. So he went down $500,000. Max started the year at 24.8, went up to 25.7. He was the highest nominal riser, not relative, but nominal. So it's 1 point. Nope, that's 0.9 million. I was just looking the wrong direction there, right to left, left to right. But still very impressive. Valtteri third at 23.3, Checo fourth at 18.5. But now, Rob, after we kind of got through the Mercedes and Red Bull drivers, who do you think closed the year fifth most valuable fantasy driver?
Okay. I'm going to go for a Ferrari driver. And although I love Carlo, I'm going to go Charles.
You're correct. It was Charles Leclerc, the Monegasque. Fifth place, first non-Red Bull Mercedes driver. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. And by little tricky, I mean there's no chance you're getting it. Who comes after Charles? Sixth driver in fantasy value, Formula1.com.
Who else was up there scoring? Well, okay, let's just...
Remember, though, okay. Max, who won the whole championship and was amazing the whole year, only went up under just about $1 million. So it's a driver who started high. Doesn't mean he had a great year. I mean, outside of the top two cars, I'll just go the other Ferrari. We'll just go Carlo. That is not correct. It's Daniel F. Ricciardo is the sixth highest value, which makes no sense. And then, wait, it gets better. Who do you think seventh? Again, acknowledging now that the scoring system, the value system is a little broken.
I'm not going to say Mick Schumacher. Fernando. Big name, big price.
Broken. It's broken.
No, it's not even Lando. It is broken. It's Seb. Seb was next to 15.1.
Oh, come on. That was the right logic, though. Big name, big value, right?
You're right.
So,
Well, you know who was after Seb is Fernando. So you nailed it. You got that right.
Okay.
And then it's Carlos. Then we kind of get into a little more of the delivery and value play. Following Carlos, it's Lando, and then Lance. So we kind of have now covered Aston Martin. We've hit Ferrari. We've hit McLaren. We hit at least one of the Alpine cars. And then as we move into the bottom half, the first one will probably not surprise you. It's Pierre Gasly, who I thought had an amazing year.
What value is he at?
11.9 million, which is...
So hang on a sec. So if you said the Mazepin was down at around 5 or whatever, because you gave the big branch, then even through the top 10, we've already lost 20 of the spread.
Correct.
Right? So we're not got much
fast.
Okay. But not much over the rest of it then, I guess.
No. And so this is where you have to kind of, in my mind, where it's won or lost. So Pierre at 11.9 was on my team all the time. He was on my team all the time. Loved having him, especially he, as I said earlier in a different podcast, I think he became Mr. Saturday the second half of the year. He was qualifying out of his brains. Felt like he started 6th every race. And so just loved watching Pierre in the AlphaTauri. Esteban after him at 10.3. And then now we're going to actually flip it and go to the bottom. So I already told you Nikita's 5.3. Who do you think was second to last?
It has to be Mick.
That's correct, 5.7.
Okay.
And then after that, here's where it gets a little interesting. Who was finished the year third to last?
I mean, I don't know. It's like roll a dice and pick one now, right? They're all much the same. But value-wise, they're all going to be within a few million of each other, aren't they?
Yeah. So now we're at these next two drivers are $100,000 apart, 6.3, 6.4.
I've not been writing this down, so I can't really think of who we got left, but we haven't hit, what team haven't we hit yet? The Williams boys.
You're correct. It's Williams. So it's Russell, but Russell finished lower than Latifi, which was fascinating to me. And then that whole middle section is Yuki surrounded by Kimi and Antonio. So
you're saying it's all broken and we don't need to pay any attention to value. You just make it up and hope for the best.
Basically, because then the constructors aren't too far off. Mercedes finished at 37.1, Red Bull at 26.6, which is a huge gulf between a team that was very close for a lot of the year. But here's where it gets important into the tiers beneath. Ferrari outpointed or outvalued, I should say, McLaren, pretty close. Then you had Aston Martin, then Alpine, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, Williams, and Haas. So, the constructors wasn't too far off. The values you might want to debate a little. And the scoring, I'm not going to go into in gory detail simply because it is so strange to me. I'll give you some examples of why. Here's the takeaway for everyone. What I believe is just pick drivers who are going to do a good job. Just find someone who is going to, just someone who's not going to finish last, who may have a good quali. And here's the one secret is find someone who can out-qualify their teammate. So in qualifying, they give points for their finish in Q1, 2, and 3. If they qualified ahead of a teammate, they reduce points if they do not qualify. And then they give points based on where you finish. So if you finish on pole, it's 10 points, and then just remove a point to 10th. So making it to Q3 will give you at least a point. In the race, same kind of deal. If you finish, you get a point. If you finish ahead of your teammate, you get some points. Positions gained can give you some points. Right. If you get the fastest lap, you get 5 points, which is a lot of points. But then they start removing points. So if you start within the top 10, but finish the race and lost positions, you lose 2 points per position. If you start outside the top 10 and lost positions, you lose 1 point per position. If you're not classified like a DNF, you lose points. And then the points for where you finish are actually similar to the actual F1 point scale. So first is 25, 18, blah, 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 down to 1 for 10th. But then here it gets even worse. There are streaks. Yeah, exactly. If your driver qualifies in the top 10 for 5 races in a row, you get 5 points. If the driver finishes the race in the top 10 for 5 in a row, you get 10 points. And same for constructors. And then there's a whole nother layer for the sprint races. Basically, Rob, what I'm telling you is I'm sure there's an insanely complicated strategy to the scoring system that someone will figure out and just, do amazing with. I'm not smart enough to figure that out. I just, as a simple man, I just pick somebody who knows how to drive, and I love it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we probably, let's not do any more points. This is this is going beyond even SAP stats. So let's just, I think let's draw a line under that one now. And I think there's enough. I was having a look at it the other day. It's like you said, it's free. They don't charge for it. You just go online, take a look at it. Don't worry about anything Brian just said about the points. And it'll be cool to try and get some numbers on this. It'll be obviously me versus Brian. One thing, just to add some extra spice here. We'll have the league that it will calculate that automatically for us, and we'll see, where we both end up finishing. I imagine it's a straight points accumulation thing. So if you get 200 points in race 1 and I get 100, and then the second race I get 1,000 and you get 100, then I'll be miles clear. But technically, we've won one race each, right?
But it does accumulate through the season, and that does matter. And
but no, accumulation matters. But the head-to-head record, what I'm saying is there'll be 23 races over the season, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Will it count there, or do I need to set up a little Excel?
We may need to set up an Excel to track
how many race wins we get, right?
I don't know. We may need to set up a little thing to track it. Although I will tell you, I am when it comes to fantasy, I am
pretty good.
I'm pretty good. So I look forward to beating all of you who participate. And I'm sure now there's a bunch of people who will play just for fun every week, throw it together and see if they can beat us so that we have to eat crow, of which I'm fine doing, obviously, as you saw earlier with the T-shirt situation. And Rob,
absolutely, you were very magnanimous in accepting that one. Yeah. So. Right. Okay. So I think we need to pivot and go over to our final piece. So you came up the other week with a great idea of probably mainly during the off season, but also during this season when there won't be a race every single week. It will be nice to take a driver of yesteryear and just go through kind of highlighting them and pulling out some key stats and reminiscing. So over to you, because this is your baby and you've picked driver number 1.
All right. So, a little preface. The point of our podcast is not to say we're experts, but rather fans. And so I chose my first driver as someone who I never got to see race and quite honestly didn't know about until probably 10 years ago, which is going to show you, my level of depth of F1 knowledge. When I got into F1 20, 30 years ago, I just didn't know of this person. I had not heard of him. His name's Jim Clark. And he is, in my mind, from watching stats, reading articles, watching, just pieces put together about him, I think he's one of the best ever. And I chose Jim Clark for that reason. So first driver out the chute, he is just tremendous. And I'll just give someone credit quickly. The Grand Tour did an episode on him, a piece of an episode. Go check it out. It is really excellent journalism from Hammond. It's season 3, episode 5.
Well, sorry, Brian, that's the only time I ever even heard of the guy. I mean, like you, I've been watching it for years, but you watch the drivers that you're currently watching. So I grew up watching it late 80s, and the drivers that I've seen on TV are all the drivers I've ever followed. I'd never really gone and dug into people from the past. So when I saw that episode of the Grand Tour, you named him as the driver. It rang a bell. I'm like, I'm sure I remember this guy. I'll hand back over to you now, but it's been so much fun this week going and kind of researching and kind of like diving back into kind of the history volumes and going beyond just Wikipedia as well. Amazing
career. And yeah, I feel like when I watch races, I always felt like they would talk about Fangio. You'd hear the name, of course, a lot about Senna. You'd hear about Piquet and Prost. You'd see, you see Alan Prost in the paddock. You'd hear about Jackie Stewart. You'd hear all about all these drivers, but I never felt like I heard about Jim Clark. And maybe that's just me, but to kind of hit a couple points quickly about Jim that I want to maybe move on beyond a little bit is F1 and all auto racing was just super dangerous back in the day. And we're talking in the 60s now, to give people a frame. Drivers were unfortunately killed fairly regularly in crashes. And it's not at all like it is today where the Formula One takes safety so seriously, thank goodness. If you haven't seen Romain Grosjean's crash from Bahrain, it's a good reminder about what they've done to make it a safer sport. And I'm grateful for it that Romain came out of that car. So Jim Clark, in his second Formula One race in 1960 at Spa, the Belgian Grand Prix, his second race, there were 2 fatal accidents in that race alone, Chris Bristow and Alan Stacey. And Clark was later quoted as saying, "I was driving pretty much scared stiff through the whole race." He finished 5th, scored his first points finish, but it kept going from there. And it was just, it's horrible to think about. But the next year, 1961 Monza, the Italian Grand Prix, September 10th, a Ferrari driver, Wolfgang von Trips, collided with the back of Jim Clark's Lotus. And von Tripp's car became airborne, crashed into a barrier. It was unfortunately caused von Tripp's death and killed 15 spectators. So again, the world was so different in the 60s. And unfortunately, just to kind of talk about this now so we can focus on the positives and the excitement as we go, 7.5 short years later, April 7th, 1968, Jim Clark died in a racing accident at 32 years of age in Hockenheimring in West Germany. And what I find really fascinating about Jim Clark is at his primary school in Scotland, and we'll talk a little bit more about his background, there's a tribute to him on the wall. It's a plaque. And famously, one of the greatest of F1 also, Ayrton Senna, made a trek to this school and went to the Jim Clark wall because Jim Clark was Ayrton Senna's idol. The way that Lewis Hamilton, we all hear about it, idolized Senna. Senna idolized Jim Clark. And greatness, just in my mind, greatness begets greatness. And you watch someone as talented as Senna, who knew what it took to drive a car, what it takes to kind of to just be successful. And he knew that Jim Clark had it. So Jim Clark, again, 72 GPs to his name in that time, 72 races. That's like 3.5 seasons worth by today's standards, because they had like 10 races a year back then. He was born into a farming family in Scotland. He was born in 1936. By the mid 50s, late 50s, he was doing rallies and hill climbs, kind of according to the articles I've read, against his family's desires. In 1958, he raced against a man who would actually be, we've all probably heard of. And if you haven't, he's an interesting figure in Formula One. He raced against Colin Chapman. Colin Chapman is famous for a variety of things, building a variety of cars, leading a variety of teams. I didn't know about Colin Chapman's driving career, but he drove against Jim Clark and later signed Jim to Lotus. And Jim made his F1 Grand Prix debut partway through the next season, the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, where we just made a return in 2021. But that was 1960 when Jim Clark made his debut. I can't wait to get into the next couple pieces because it just makes your socks go up and down hearing about the success this guy had on a track.
Yeah, I mean, I was going over, I watched the Grand Tour episode again. That was great. And I spent a lot of time going down rabbit holes on YouTube as well, watching a variety of different pieces. It's a shame because not obviously as much coverage, as much filming and all that kind of good stuff. But the guy was fantastic. He'd already broken onto the scene, scored points in his first race. He'd had basically been involved in fatal incidents, which still hadn't kind of pushed him away. I mean, that one, I've seen the clip of the Ferrari getting airborne and taking out the crowd, and Jim Clark's that car in front, and it kind of just cartwheels to a halt, and he's just looking at all the wreckage around. I'm not sure I could ever have got in a car again, and he did, and he came back year after year, and I think we could see he got 2 world championships in 63 and 65, and probably would have had another 3 or 4 to his name, all but mechanical failures. I think it was 62, 64, and 67. According to the records, he was basically robbed of titles because of being blessed with a very fast but brittle car. So he came from nowhere and just kind of just ripped everything up, but was so kind of just down to earth about it. Like you say, this Scottish guy didn't like the limelight, didn't really like to be in the press's eye. You know, his teammate was, I think his teammate was Graham Hill, right? Who was the kind of the bigger
portion of his career.
Of his career was the bigger name, and he was outperforming him time after time after time. And it was just, you just wouldn't see something like that these days. It was kind of the way he just comes straight in and just winning, and not winning by, I think you're going to talk about this later, but not just winning by small margins, like completely destroying fields. And when they were in that same team together, Graham Hill never got close to me. And like you say, Graham Hill's a name you hear of more. You hear these other names, and I've never really heard of Jim down the years. But yeah, it's an amazing record that he had there. And I think from pole positions, everyone kind of looks at pole positions as being a good indicator of a driver's talent around a track as well. Single lap, how fast can you go? And poles are always something everyone's looking to. Everyone was looking at when Schumacher had the record, Senna's had the record, Hamilton. Everyone's looking at pole winning figures, and he was absolutely astounding. It just let me just go to the notes here. It's kind of he started from, I can't remember the number of figures that we have here. We started from pole in 33 of his 72 races. 33.
Amazing.
The number alone puts him fifth in the all-time list. But when you look at the percentage strike rate of how often he's starting from pole, it's getting close to 50. It's 45.8% he's on pole position, which is only on a strike rate of percentages, is only putting him second on the list to Fangio. So it is, the more you kind of start digging into this guy and how much he won and pole positions and conversion rates, it's like, how are you not hearing this guy's name every single time they breathe, the likes of Fangio and the others? It's absolutely bizarre. But I know we're going to dig more into the stats because obviously this is a big stats place, and you're the king of stats. So
well, I don't want to make it too much of a stats place, but yeah, I agree.
I know.
Yeah.
And everything we've talked about so far is about how he's come in from racing his own car in kind of sports car racing. He came into Formula One. He's gone straight in. He's scored points. He's won world championships. And that would be enough for most people. But why don't you pick the story up here, Brian?
Yeah, the thing that blows my mind even more, and we're going to talk about a season in particular we'll highlight in a second, but Jim never lost his taste to race anything, anywhere. And you may say, well, I'm pretty sure back in the day that was more common. I remember Nigel Mansell and Fittipaldi and all these people who went across to Indy and would come back to Formula One and do these things. But it was different with Jim. And I'll give you a couple highlights. First of all, in 63, he was relatively new to F1. He went across the pond, raced the Indy 500, finished second. And the Grand Tour makes it sound like in 65 it was his first ever time doing it. It's not accurate. But 63 he finished second. But there was even some controversy about the winner and his car leaking brake fluid and other things that we talk about, and they should have been. We're not going to get into that here. But regardless, crossed the pond, finished second in his first American race. He won the Drivers' World Championship in 63, which we mentioned briefly. He won 7 out of 10 races, gave Lotus its first Constructors' Championship. He had just amazing success as he continued, where winning those 7 races was only equal in 1984 when Alain Prost, who I mentioned already, won 7. And then it was broken by Ayrton Senna in 88 when we'd already seen more races. And so when you kind of think about a 70% success rate, that's not something you touch. And he would have won so many more races had he not had some of the DNFs that he had today. And, he ran for Lotus. And on the Top Gear many years ago, they did a thing that has stuck with me ever since. And my friends always find it funny when I bust it out. Lotus stands for lots of trouble, usually serious. And so I may have been at a high performance driver's ed one day and there were like 4 Lodi. Is that the plural?
I'm not sure.
Lotus are famous for the road cars being great handling cars. And so I'm at this track with an old AMG of mine that is just high horsepower. And I'm thinking I'm going to eat these guys for lunch. And what ended up happening is I'd pass them on the straight and then they'd be basically opening my trunk lid around all of the corners as we came back around, and they're laughing. And then we'd hit the straight and then I'd basically flick them off and then see them again about 4 corners later. So anyway, but as we're having a lunch in the thing, I said, Lotus, lots of trouble, usually serious. And they didn't find it as funny. But so Jim Clark, touched on this a bit. He could drive anything. So in addition to doing IndyCar and F1, which you may say those are pretty similar, he went to Australia and ran in something called the Tasman Series. He raced in Formula 2 events throughout France and other places, having success in all those years. He took part in a NASCAR event, driving, and I had to look this up, something called a 7-liter Holman Moody Ford at the American 500 at the Bank Speedway at Rockingham. He could drive anything. He drove a Lotus Cortina in the British Touring Car Championships, IndyCar rallying. He did the 1966 Rally of Great Britain in that Cortina, and he had success in all of these venues. He won that Tasman Series in Australia. The same year, he tackled other things. So what blows my mind is in the 60s, he had to take, like, I'm assuming, multiple connections on horrible planes, turboprops, and maybe some jets all across the globe to race and then get back on a plane and go the other direction. I can't be bothered to sit and coach to go to work and across the globe. And he did this and won and turned it around. And so to me, it blows my mind. Sorry, Rob, I didn't even cut you off on that.
No, I was going to say exactly the same thing. It's like when you sit there and you start looking at all these different events that he's been in, this guy just seemed to want to race anything. I'm not sure if tractor racing was around back then, but I think if there was, he would have been in tractor racing and he would have won it. But the other thing isn't about the number of events. It's a number of places around the globe this guy's going in an era then, like you say, it wasn't like he's going to jump on the Jim Clark personal jet, be there in a couple of hours, race, have a rest, come back. I mean, you kind of almost feel that he would have gone on horseback to get places if it meant that he could go and race something and try and drive it fast. There was an interview that I saw with him where it's a natural, you can see it, it's a natural passion in his eyes where he just says all he ever wanted to do was just see how fast he could make things go. He was interested in getting into racing because he just wanted to see how it felt to drive things fast. So he wasn't a snob. He wasn't kind of like, well, I've made Formula One, I don't need to go anywhere else now. Yeah, I'm going to go and drive a beat-up Cortina in touring cars, and I'm going to go rallying, and I'm going to go to
Formula 2. I'm going to go to Australia. In 1965, a season that cannot nor will ever even be close to be paralleled, he skipped the Monaco Grand Prix, the most prestigious race on F1, to go to race the Indy 500. And you know what he did? He won the Indy 500. It was the only driver. Here's the list of drivers that won the Indy 500 and an F1 title in the same year. Jim Clark. That's the list. Other drivers have won both, but never at the same time. Graham Hill, who we already talked about, Mario Andretti, who I think everybody knows, Emerson Fittipaldi, and Jacques Villeneuve. All won both. None of them ever won both in the same year. In 65, he won the Tasman Series in Australia for older F1 cars and other things. He ran in that series for 3 years, but that year he won it. How did he do that? And the last thing I'd say about the variety of cars is not long after seeing the Grand Tour episode and sort of kindling my love of Jim Clark, a good friend of mine, Paul, invited me and my family out to visit him and his family in Detroit. And we were doing a variety of things, having fun, eating conies and doing other, having a good time. Went to a hockey game. We also made it to the Henry Ford Museum. And I did not know this car was there, but as I'm walking around, and I've got a lot of good pictures with my daughters in front of some of the cars and other things. The Wienermobile was there and all this stuff. They have a race car section. And there was a British Racing Green car. I'm like, what? And I kind of came around, and it's a number 82, I think, if I'm remembering right. And I looked closely at it, and it is the Lotus chassis Ford powered 1965 Indy car driven by Jim Clark. And I freaked out like a little boy who had just been given an all-you-can-eat buffet in a candy store. And I called my family over. I called my friend Paul and his family over. I'm like, you guys got to see this thing. And what ended up happening is just a little bit inside baseball. But I was so excited by this car. I have a picture of it on my phone. But more importantly, that night, Paul and I, our friend Justin from Toronto, drove in. And the three of us were having a couple beers. And I said, guys, I hate to be this guy, but we have to watch the Grand Tour episode about Jim Clark so you understand what I just saw today. And I showed them that 20-minute or 15-minute segment that Hammond did. And they looked at me like, I never heard of him. And I said, I know. It's a travesty because he is a GOAT of all time. And so, I don't know, Rob, we were talking about this. Other drivers and just people in general could give sort of anecdotes about Jim. You want to share some of those that are just tremendous? Yeah,
I mean, and it is going to maybe dip into the morbid again, going back to the day of his crash, but they all basically, no one, the crash wasn't filmed. There's no footage of it, and it kind of remained a mystery for a long time. And all the drivers came out and were saying, if it can happen, if Jim Clark can make a mistake, it can happen to any of us, because he was well revered as being the smoothest, cleanest driver. Jackie Stewart said, he was so clean. He drove with such finesse. He never bullied a racing car. He sort of caressed it into doing the things that he wanted it to do. So it kind of sent shockwaves through the driver community, because no one could believe that Jim Clark had made a mistake. I think they brought in air crash investigators to look at the wreckage of the car to say, can you work out what happened. And they still don't know for sure. They're pretty sure something went wrong at the back end of the car, whether it be a tire deflating or the rear axle locking. And I think kind of everybody accepts that because they don't want to think that the guy could have made a mistake. But there was the Cedric Seltzer, which worked with Jim Clark and wrote a book about his time with Jim as well as other time on the F1 circuit. But he said that it wasn't just that there's a phrase about driving a car to its limits. And somehow Jim did that without really driving it to its limits, because it was seen as an urban myth. But in this book, it says that it's actually a true story, is that he could make his tires last like 3 or 4 races. Some drivers are taking multiple sets of tires in a weekend, and he's using the same tires for multiple races.
Wow.
They
That's
said that
amazing.
the brake pads lasted 3 times longer than any racers. And when he was with Graham Hill, it was sometimes embarrassing. And so that Graham didn't feel so bad, they would sometimes change the brake pads on Jim's car more regularly than it really needed to, because Graham's just going through them at a rate of knots. And Jim's barely scratching the surface of these pads. He's going back to that Jackie Stewart quote, he's caressing the car. The car is basically running its absolute optimum, but without putting any additional stress through the tires, the brake pads. That Lotus was brittle. The suspension rods were notorious, but he was just perfect. And there was one final piece, was that one of the mechanics, one of the engineers used to say, you could line up 10 random gearboxes on the bench and put them in any order, and I'll go and take a look at each one. I'll tell you which one's Jim Clark's gearbox, because that will be the gearbox that will have the least amount of wear in it. I mean, it's just, and especially back in those days, there's no electrical devices going on. There's no kind of automatic this, automatic the other. I mean, pretty much everything in that car is connected by bits of metal. So it's, I mean, you probably wouldn't appreciate this because what do you call them over here? Stick shifts? Because it's very lazy driving style in the US, right? Your left foot doesn't have to do anything. It just kind of just sits there and comes along for the ride. But back in my world, when I grew up and having a driving test, that left foot needed to do a lot of clutching and changing of gears. So
You know how hard it is to shift gears when you have your cell phone in one hand, a burger in the other, and you're trying to flick someone off as well at the same time? That's how Americans do it, buddy. And we got other stuff to do. We don't need to be rowing through the gears all the time. Although I do know how to drive sticks, so don't say that about me.
Well, okay, I'll let you off then. But I kind of got used to it now, actually. I'm sure if I go back home and get a hire car, then I'm going to stall for the first few times. My left foot's going to have no idea what's going on. It's but anyway, just to kind of wrap my piece up before coming back over to you, look, as me and you were looking through this together, I think over in the US here, you have something very similar to, we have an annual award ceremony in the UK, which is the BBC Sports Personality of the Year. And in the US, you had ABC's Wide World of Sports that did the Athlete of the Year, supposedly international, but pretty much went to an American.
Almost always American, yeah.
And they gave it to good old Jim in 1965, probably just for the Indy win, but I mean, probably for everything else that went with it as well. And as any receiver of such a huge award, went out and obviously completely partied and got drunk and had... No. Sorry, look at my notes here. He went back to his tiny hometown in Scotland and had an open-top double-decker bus through his little town. And then, it just... I think the notes were that he's just wanted to go home, show local boy done good, very, very meek, very humble. And maybe that's why. Maybe he wasn't the big personality that went with the results, and maybe that then didn't have the flair to capture the press's attention. Maybe that's why we don't hear so much about him from like the Fangios and those types of people, because he didn't give a lot of airtime, apparently. Well, he couldn't. He needed to be packing his bags and getting on a plane to go and do the next race that he was in.
Well, and to me, I totally agree. It is disappointing we don't hear more. It's almost like if Michael Jordan had his career cut short and then we never heard about him. But he accomplished so much still. And Jim Clark did the same. And a few SAP stats to close us out on this amazing driver. And I feel like the mariachi version is respectful enough. SAP stats. So, Jim Clark did the special hat trick of pole position, so starting first, qualifying first, starting the race first, fastest lap of the race, and winning 11 times. Behind 2 other drivers in total count of that hat trick, Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton, who are regarded as 2 of the best drivers ever. In percentage terms, again, acknowledging the smaller sample set, he's behind Fangio, who's often also thought of as one of the first GOATs of Formula One, and Ascari, who I think drove for Ferrari, if I have that right. I know he has a car named after him now. But when you really dial it into domination, where you not only took the pole position and won and had the fastest lap, but also led every lap of the race, what's called a Grand Slam. Jim Clark had 8. The only current drivers or other drivers in the ballpark are Hamilton with 6 and Vettel with 4. And in percentage terms, Ascari might be a little bit ahead because he raced fewer, but Jim Clark has the most Grand Slams ever. In 1963, when Jim was really kind of cutting his teeth in F1, he led 71.47% of the laps of the season, the highest percentage of laps led ever. He raced in 72 GPs. 2 world championships came from it. We talked about the other 3 that might have been. 25 victories, which is 34% of his starts. 33 poles, 45% of his starts. 32 podiums, 44% of his starts. But I highlighted and joked about the Lotus, the ability to finish the race. 23 DNFs. If you remove those from the denominator in the math above, over half of his finishes were victories. And so, as we talked about, next week, we'll hit a special episode, kind of talk about a lot of the different pieces of F1 that you can learn from. But I'd like to just kind of close it on that. Jim Clark, in my mind, one of the greatest ever, wildly underappreciated. Check him out. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Have a good one, guys, and we'll catch you next week.
Goodbye.